Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Caffeinated Bible Chatter. We are back for another episode on the book of Revelation. This is Kyle O'Shields. I'm sitting here with Dylan Brown. And as usual, as always, we got this sword out. This thing's sharp. It's ready to cut. Ready to dive into this thing. That's right. That's right. And the coffee is out. The black rifle. Just black. Nothing in this thing. I'm trying to stick pretty strict to that carnivore thing. So
you know what they say. I don't know what they say, but I got coffee too, big guy, and it's good stuff. And I've been waiting for this for a while to be able to let our listeners know. But I've gotten me a grinder. And so I grinded my own. It's Starbucks dark roast espresso flavored beans. And so I brewed me up a cup, grinded me up a cup, however you say that in the coffee world. I did a little brew and a little grind to get this coffee, if you know what I'm saying. But it's good though. It's darn good actually. And,
I will say it. I can. Because he did this the other night. They came over here and he grinded some beans. And I can actually tell a difference in what was here the other day and what I'm drinking now.
Yeah,
there is a difference.
There really is, and this is how I'm going to get closer to my journey of getting to black coffee, because like you actually can tell like I don't want to say the smoothness, but like I think that's what it is. Yeah. Which, obviously you can grind it into different, like you can grind it and make it more fine or more coarse. So I'm kind of right in the middle as a beginner in the grinding business, as they say. So, yeah, so that's good. I'm ready to roll. This got me supercharged for this, literally majority of the book of Revelation right here, chapter 6 to 19.
We're hitting a ton of chapters.
Yes.
In about 45 minutes.
That's right.
Yes. But so if you've been listening or you haven't been listening, this is part 3 of the book of Revelation. So if you missed those first 2, I would go check them out so this all makes sense what we're doing. But I will read those 2 verses that we've been starting with just so we can all be on the same page and know what we're talking about here today. But so those 2 key verses, Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, it says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. So again, John is in the Spirit. And then verse 19, write the things which thou hast seen, the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. So we're talking about John being in the Spirit. He is basically time traveled. Right, he's teleported to the future. So when verse 19 says, "Write the things which thou hast seen," he's talking about the church age. He's talking about us. And then when he says the things which are, and we hit 4 and 5 on the last episode, but the things which are, that was the things going on in heaven. Right, that's the judgment seat. We looked at that, the rapture. And now he's still writing about the things which are in chapters 6 through 19, which we're gonna hit today. So he's there when it's happening. That's why it says the things which are. And then that things which shall be hereafter, talking about the millennial reign, going into eternity, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's obviously a lot of ground to cover, but I was telling Big Kai before we jumped on here that really our plan in this episode is to lay out what I think is the most important thing to understand about the book of Revelation, because it really is the puzzle piece that goes right in the middle that connects everything else regarding the book of Revelation. So like if you don't have the main key thing that we're going to lay out, and again, it's not like me and Kyle, we're just sitting at the house one day and we're just like, wow, we stumbled upon this. I heard one guy say it like this, that research based on the clearest definition of what the word means, it's to search something that somebody else has already searched. That's why it says research, like just research what somebody else has searched. Yeah. And so we've got a lot of guys that we have learned from and are learning from, continue to do that. But, they've laid these things out a long time ago. But it's super crucial because, like I said, I think last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I always get nervous when I hear, and again, I call this whatever you want, but I get nervous when people are talking about, yeah, we're studying the book of Revelation. And like, I don't have any context for, what those people, the way they view the Bible or anything like that. And the reason why I say that is because, for one, rightly dividing is so important. And what we're going to be looking at in this episode is actually part of rightly dividing. So many times we've talked about dispensationalism on this podcast, and a lot of times our minds go to, when we think about rightly dividing, that we only think about dividing in between divisions, okay, in between dispensations. So, okay, we got to make sure, divide between the law and the church age. We got to make sure, we divide between the church age and, the millennium or whatever. But rightly dividing goes much further than that. And we've given examples of how there's certain references, like in the book of Isaiah, where one verse, half the verse before a semicolon is talking about the first coming of Christ. And then the other half, and sometimes vice versa, is talking about the second coming. Well, that's a division, and you have to rightly divide. And if you're not familiar with that, that sounds complicated, but it's really not. It's just, as you study your Bible, understand, the context and what it's talking about. But the reason I say all that, it's interesting because I was noticing last week, actually, talking about how people have such a weird views of really the Bible, but specifically the book of Revelation. We laid out those three common views at the beginning of this series, like the, post-millennial view, like a historical view, like this stuff happened in history, and those guys are like, all this stuff's already happened, but it was in or it's happening throughout history. Then there's the guys that are preterists, and that is growing rapidly, and that is people that believe all of the book of Revelation was happened or accomplished in AD 70 when Jerusalem, was destroyed. Nero came in, and they actually think Nero was the Antichrist. And I don't get how they think Christ ruled and reigned before 80, 70, because his first coming, he certainly did not rule and reign. So I don't. They make a mess of that. But I heard something for the first time that was completely new to me, and it just shows you this stuff is growing. Just whacked out views, and that is Robbie Gallaty. And I don't know if you ever heard any of his stuff, Big Cow.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a Baptist pastor. I mean, he's not a King James guy or anything. And I actually like the guy. I've got a couple books behind me on this bookshelf by him, or at least one. And he's a big discipleship guy, and so I appreciate him for that, because we're certainly into that. But he literally said in a sermon, and it was probably an old clip, but it was shared on his Instagram, that he's always viewed the book of Revelation as a prophetic book, but he realizes now he was wrong, and now he views it. He realizes it's actually a book about discipleship. And I didn't listen to that whole sermon, but I don't know how you come to that mindset. Like when you study this book out, and it's literally clearly prophetic, like where we are, premillennial, pre-trib guys, we believe none of this stuff has happened in the book of Revelation except for chapters 1 through 3. Yep. And we're still in chapter 3, the end of chapter 3. We're in Laodicea. And so majority of this book has not happened. Chapter 4, verse 1 is the rapture, and that is what is, that's what we're waiting on, and that's right around the corner. Yep. So there's a lot of crazy stuff about this book, but I say that was a long rabbit trail to say that what we're going to lay out here in this episode is so crucial. And okay, so let's just get to it. What is it that we're going to lay out that maybe you've never heard that is extremely crucial when breaking down the book of Revelation? Well, that's this: that chapters 6 through chapter 19, it's not written in a linear way. In other words, it's, there's four specific types of judgments that show up. Excuse me. You got the seals. You've got the trumpets. The person. I always get this word checked up. The personalities. We'll call them the seven personalities. You've got the seven vials. Okay, you've got these things. Well, what most people do when they approach this book is, because we think, one thing happens and then another thing follows. And that's okay to think like that somewhat, because the beginning of Revelation does start off that way. I mean, Revelation chapter 1 is kind of in its own box, because that's like John giving a prelude of what happened to him. But then chapters 2 and chapter 3 into chapter 4, it does kind of happen in sequential order. But really, most of the book of Revelation and most of the Bible is not written in a linear way. That's why you can go to your Old Testament, and there are books that are written, like, as far as a chronological order, there are books that are written, earlier on in the Old Testament, as far as where it's laid out in your Bible. And that prophet is, doing his work at the same time another guy that doesn't show up in our Bible until the end of the Old Testament, but yet they're in the same time frame. And I hope that's not a confusing example.
But you got to look at it like circles almost.
It's a circle, yeah. So I think, like, one example would be, and I may be wrong about this. If I'm wrong, shoot it in the comments and to help the algorithm for YouTube or something. But I think Nehemiah and Zechariah, they of course have to do with the walls of Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff. Well, they were working kind of hand in hand, or they were bumpered up against each other, very close proximity as far as time wise, when they were alive and when they were doing their deal. Haggai, a little bit older than them, but he's way at the end of the book. And then yet Nehemiah is written way before, at least laid out in our Bible. Yet Nehemiah was actually younger than Haggai. And so, again, you can't think about the Bible in like Kyle said, it's a circular thing. It's not a linear thing. So we've given examples of how, how the Bible ends just like it started. And we'll probably say more about that when we get to the end of Revelation. But a lot of the things that show up at the beginning of the Bible show up at the end of the Bible. And so that's the way God works. He's a masterpiece with it in his book. So, but saying all that, we have to realize this. Those four judgments don't happen in order. They're actually synonymous. Okay, so what we're saying is that the trumpets, the personages, I never know. I think it's personages.
You say the events of the Antichrist or something.
The events of the Antichrist. That's the way Rutland breaks it down. Yes. The vials, the seals. Okay. It's all talking about the same time frame. Okay. Yeah. So it's not like one came and then another one didn't come till a couple years later.
It's like John. It's harder to see it here. It's the same thing as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They wrote about Christ from four different perspectives. It's the same thing in Revelation right here. It's just harder to see it because it's one guy writing it.
Right.
So that's how you have to look at it, the four layers.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. Just Christ is very consistent. And just like he gave four accounts of his first coming, he's giving four accounts of his second coming. And so that's absolutely the truth. And so one thing to keep in the back of our mind as we'll kind of dive into these four accounts really quickly. But one thing to keep in the back of your mind is that, again, we approach the book of Revelation literally, like we do the rest of the Bible. We approach it literally. We approach it believingly. But it is okay to keep in your mind and keep in the back of your mind that John is writing about real stuff. Again, we're not Catholics. We're not Calvinists. Again, interesting how those two belief systems always end up rubbing shoulders. But we don't have to allegorize or spiritualize everything we see here. We can take it at face value. And so, but one thing we can remember is that John is writing this, talking about things that are happening in the 21st century, but he's writing it with a first century viewpoint. So, like, he wouldn't understand a plane. He wouldn't understand a car. He wouldn't, those things, like if they were to be thrown at him at the Isle of Patmos, it'd be a crazy thing because he's never seen anything like that. And
Yeah.
to be honest, nobody saw anything like that until the early 1900s. So it's just been a recent thing, really, in all of history. So, and I'm getting nervous. My son is creeping up right beside me. Hey, you need to go in there with your mom. Go. I don't know what he's doing.
He wants to give a little input on Revelation.
He does. Yeah. I told him if he ends up being a preterist, I'm going to whoop the fire out of him. I'm going to spare the rod, spoil the child. So he ain't going to be no preterist. But that's important to remember that. So these 4 accounts, this is a simple way to lay it out. And Kyle, if you lay it out differently at all, you say something. But the 7 seals you have first. Macklin, go in there with your mom. Go. Kyle, I'm going to mute this real quick. Say a prayer. Tell them the layout of the 4 layers of each account and what chapters they are.
Okay. So those 4 layers, the 4 different perspectives, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 different perspectives that John is writing here in Revelation, we're looking at. So chapter 6, you have the seals. And then chapters 7 through 11 is those trumpets. 12 through 14 is those personages. I don't know how you say the word right. We'll just call it the events of the Antichrist. And then chapters 15 through 19 are the vials being poured out, the wrath of God. But hearing those separated like that, they're all happening at the same time. So the seals, the trumpets, the vials, the events of the Antichrist, all of that is going on at the same time. It's just the way you read it. If you read it from chapter 6 to 19, it's going to look weird and messed up. So you got to remember that circle thing as you look at these 4 layers.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, I didn't hear some of that at the beginning, but so the way I have it laid out is the seals are the description in Revelation 6 and 7, really through the first verse of chapter 8. The trumpets are the trumpets are laid out from chapter 8, verse 2 through the end of chapter 11. The third account being the parsonages, being in chapters 12 through 14, and then the last account being the 7 vials, being chapters 15 through 19. Is that the same way that you wrote down?
Yeah, Alma. I just had it listed out as 4 because I was putting 4 and 5 in the this middle part of the things. Which
gotcha.
Seals
Okay.
4 through 6, but they don't actually have until 6. But
yeah, well, one thing that's interesting I found is that so like most guys now lay it out like I just laid it out as far as the 7 seals being chapter 6 through chapter 8. But what's interesting, because I was looking at some stuff, is Ruckman, and we've given him a couple shout outs here recently. Real nice, sweet fellow that used to preach. He actually has the second account or the trumpet starting in chapter 7.
Yeah, that's actually what I said when I was 7 through 11 for the trumpets.
Right. Now what's interesting is I will say is it is that is the only account that is a little bit more confusing, because chapter 6 gives you one whole account just in that chapter.
Yeah.
And then chapter 7 is kind of like an obscure, weird chapter that's not really talking about a whole lot of things other than the 144,000. And then boom, back to chapter 8, verse 1, you see the 7th seal show up.
Yeah.
So I'll go with Mark Trotter on this one, because he's the one I learned from that. It's chapter 6 through chapter 8, verse 1, because it makes sense. But I thought that was interesting. So I think it is cool to we can kind of tackle some stuff in chapter 6, because chapter 6 does give you a full account just in one chapter, and it's the only chapter that gives you a full account. Normally, it's a range of chapters, but chapter 6 is different in and of itself. And again, it's the first chapter that starts dealing with the tribulation and the things going on there. And so Again, remember how I've said in past episodes, the way I view this is like a TV show. Chapter 4 and 5 is happening at the same time that chapter 6 is. But chapter 6 is showing the part of the episode of those that are on earth, whereas in chapters 4 and 5 is showing the part of the episode where those who are in heaven that are saved in the church age. So just important to remember that. But I think this is the crucial thing for me, because if I were to because we're trying to relay that this is 4 accounts, because once you understand that this is 4 accounts from chapter 6 through chapter 19, and it's just a repetition thing, it's going to make a whole lot more sense. Because what no other commentator, that most commentators believe, and Bible scholars, whatever that means, they're a scholar. A scholar means you've mastered something. And so, as the old Doc used to say, he'll never call himself a scholar because he is still a student of that book. Amen, amen. And that's the way I want to view myself. So whatever a Bible scholar is. But anyway, most of the scholars and those kind of guys, they don't believe that this is 4 accounts of the same thing. They think it's different things. And so when you approach it as different things, literally, you're never going to be able to make sense of any of it. It just seems like a big old chaos. And outside of a few random chapters that talk about other things that happens inside the tribulation, you can grab hold of some cool things there, but you can't make heads or tails as far as the timeline of things. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I think it's really crucial for us, Big Kai, to lay out how we can prove that this is 4 accounts, and the way that we would do that. To listener, if you're out there in podcast land right now, the way that we would do that is by showing you how the tribulation is coming to an end 4 times. Yeah. So, okay, if the tribulation comes to an end in a certain passage, but then later on it's talking about other things that happen in the tribulation, something's not adding up here. And that's why we, of course, studying behind other people, have come to the understanding that it's 4 accounts of the same thing. So I want to lay those out. So Kyle, if you want to go to, I'm in Revelation 6, but Kyle, if you want to go to Revelation 11. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to show you the 4 endings of the tribulation / where the second coming is starting to come into play. Because that's the timeline. The tribulation ends, and the way the tribulation ends is Jesus Christ is coming literally for his second advent to set up his millennial kingdom. So the first ending of the book is in chapter 6. Chapter 6, verse 14 through 17. So I'm going to read that. It says, "The heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb." Okay, you understand that. "For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" So that great day there, this is no longer talking about them being scared of the Antichrist. That great day is this is men that are hiding, men that are fearful, because that great war of Christ coming with the armies, being us, being a part of that if you're saved, coming behind him, and Christ with his word wipes them out. And he's coming with vengeance. And so the first time he came, you've heard the cliches, but the first time he came as born in a manger as a baby. And the second time he's coming as a king and a conqueror, and he's kicking tail and taking names and asking questions later. And so that's the first time the tribulation is coming to an end, and the second coming is beginning. Okay. The second, so that's the end of the first account. Again, that's why I said chapters, the 7 seals are the hardest to digest. And again, we don't have it all figured out, but it's the hardest to make sense of, because then it still talks about seals in chapter 8, verse 1. And so that'd be something to study out on your own. But we see there the first account coming to an end. Okay. The second account coming to an end is in with the seven trumpets is in Revelation 11. Big Calf, you've got that verse 14 through 19.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out real quick is one of the kind of landmarks that you can look for when looking at these four separate accounts is an earthquake is happening. In that one,
Yeah.
we didn't read verse 12, but there was a great earthquake, and then that stuff happened. And you'll see it again here in Revelation 11.
And I just want to plug in too off that. That was a good comment. That would take us back if you've been with us for a while as a listener. You can think back to our episode on the blood moons and stuff like that, and people were flipping out when that blood moon happened back a couple months ago, and we were like, "That's dumb to be flipping out because the rapture is not connected with those things, but the second coming is." And earthquakes are a part of that, Matthew 24 and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that was a good point, Big Guy. Glad you brought that out.
All right, chapter 11, verse 14. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 4 and 20 elders, which sat before God on their seats, fell upon their faces and worshiped God, saying, we give thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which art and wast and art to come, because thou hast taken to thee thy great power and hast reigned. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and to them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. And verse 19, and the temple of God was open in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail.
Okay, so that's the second account coming to an end. Now, one thing that's crucial to understand, and this shows you how specifically the book of Revelation is not in a linear fashion. And that is because verse 17 and verse 18, notice that the second coming is the tribulation is passing, and the second coming is come to fruition. In verse 17, notice the last phrase of verse 17, when these elders are worshiping and talking to the Lord, it says, because thou hast taken to thee thy great power and hast reigned. Past tense. Okay, verse 18. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come in the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants. It goes on and says more. Okay, but the key there is this. The verse 17 and verse 18, it's actually talking about the millennial reign in a past tense. And so, obviously, when we lay out the book of Revelation, the millennial reign hasn't happened yet. We don't get to the millennial reign till Revelation chapter 20, which will be next week. Yet we can see here that something more has happened that has surpassed the tribulation and the beginning of the second advent. And so it's important to note that, again, showing that God is showing 4 accounts of the same thing happening over and over again. So I hope that's super clear. But so the third one, Kyle, I'll let you go to Revelation 19. But the third ending, so you had the first ending in Revelation 6, end of the chapter. Second ending is the end of Revelation 11. The third ending is the third account coming to an end. Again, these are all synonymous. It's just worded differently because it's just like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are sometimes worded differently, but it's all relaying the same message. But Revelation chapter 14, verse 13 through 20. I'm not going to read all of that, but let me read the last few verses. Verse 17 says, and another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in thy sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. and the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse's bridle, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Okay, so that I will say, as an honest man, that account is the most vague. Like it's pretty vague there. That account is. But one thing that's important to note is we can cross-reference. Like verse 19, for instance. Verse 19 says, "And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God." Well, Revelation 6, which we just read as the first account ending, which is again synonymous with it's the same thing. Verse 14 through verse 16 says, "And the heaven departed as the scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places." Okay. I think this was the one, maybe I'm thinking about a different account. Okay. Verse 15, "And the kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the chief captains and the mighty men and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens and the rocks." Verse 16, "And said to the mountains and the rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb." So what it is painting this same picture of God's wrath coming to them via the second coming of Christ, the second advent. And these men that oppose God, that have followed the Antichrist, are about to be wiped out. Okay, it's just worded in a different way, but that's exactly what the end of Revelation chapter 14 is talking about. Because notice verse 17, it says, this angel is literally piercing the wrath of God, if you will, for using our vernacular. And then this wrath of God is coming down onto the earth. Okay. So again, I'll be honest enough to say that's the most vague of the four, but it is talking about the same thing that Revelation chapter 6 and then therefore Revelation chapter 11 is talking about.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say there, we didn't read verses 14 through 16, but talking about that sickle, you can see here that, so it says the angel, whatever, and another angel came out of the temple. This is verse 15 of chapter 14, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, "Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time has come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle, and the earth was reaped. So there's that rapture of the 144,000. Yep. So like in Revelation chapter 11, it circles. Right. Revelation 11, when he calls them up right before he's coming back. So that first time the
rapture,
yeah. So that first time the sickle is thrust in, he's calling them out. And then if you notice in the ones you read, thrust in thy sharp sickle, and that's when he's taking out his enemies. He thrust it in the great winepress.
Yeah, and that would be a good plug too, to go back and listen to some of our episodes on the rapture, because we talk about the different come up hithers in the book of Revelation, and it shows how people that are post-trib people and even mid-trib, they're not dumb. They actually do grab hold of some Bible truth. It's just that they have it wrongly divided. And so that's what we always say. And many other guys have said in the past, that false doctrine normally comes from biblical truth that's wrongly divided. So that definitely is happening there in Revelation 14. So and then Kyle, I got the last one written down as Revelation 19. If you want to go there, I've got a verse 11 through 21, but I mean that's a lot.
Yeah, that's what I have down.
Now I will say, this is, for our listeners' sake, this is the most clear of all of them. This is the most clear-cut one, where it's literally, laying out the second coming, because it follows, like verse 7 starts the marriage of chapter 19, starts the marriage supper of the Lamb, which that's us in heaven. So it finally pans back to heaven for a minute. It shows us up there. It saved people up there after the judgment seat with garments, and some people with less garments. And then right after the consummation of that marriage, boom, we're following Christ down here to the earth for the second coming. And so that picks up, the literal second advent picks up in verse 11. So I don't know, Kyle, maybe read, verse 11 through 14, something like that.
All right. And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew, but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean.
Yeah, and so obviously that's pretty understandable what's happening there. Christ is literally coming back with the armies following him, such as that being believers. But then if you skip down to verse 18, it paints the same picture that we read, with the first account of Revelation 6 that I tried to compare with Revelation 14, and there's comparisons with Revelation 11 like we read. But remember in Revelation 6, you had those kings that are like, fearful. These big guys. They're asking the mountains to fall on them so that they'd be protected, yada yada. Well, verse 18 of Revelation 19 says that, talking about Christ coming back, says that ye may eat the flesh of the kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond. And that's a phrase and words that we saw in those other passages too, both small and great. And so and it goes all the way down to verse 21. And it talks about people being slain by the sword of him who sat on the horse, that being Christ, and that sword is coming out of the mouth of God because it's his word, and it's the very sword that we hold here. So
that verse 18 is one of the craziest verses to me. I was looking at that the other day. Like 17, the angel is calling all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, all the birds. And then verse 18, that ye may eat the flesh. So all the people he just took out, he calls all the fowls of the air. And then verse 21 tells you the fowls were filled with their flesh, is the supper of the great God.
Yeah, that is pretty wild. And it's especially considering, I guess, birds, they picture spirits in the Bible. So maybe those are good birds that do that, but he's allowing some, there's definitely some spiritual context to that, because I would say that, I think we probably talked about this on this episode before. I mean, not on this episode, but on this podcast, that ravens, owls, those kind of birds picture demonic spirits, and maybe they surpass just picturing them sometimes. I don't know.
Yep.
And then certain other birds, such as doves. I mean, you see that with Noah. He sends out a dove and he sends out a raven. And so it's both sides. But so that's pretty wild and very descriptive too.
That Matthew 24:28, I wrote that here, but it says where the carcass is gathered, there will it's something like where the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
That is wild. Yes. Yeah. So I hope that makes sense to you as the listener, that, again, those are very key, key things to remember. It's 4 accounts, and you can see the end of each account in those passages. Again, end of Revelation 6, end of Revelation 11, end of Revelation 14, and end of Revelation 19. And again, we said that all this tribulational stuff is chapters 6 through 19, and it's just 4 accounts repeating itself, just like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did. Okay, and it's repeating itself of the tribulation and the second coming. Because again, back to what Kyle said, Revelation chapter 1, he's in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Okay, according to Revelation 1:10, and the Lord's day is the day of the Lord, which is when Christ is coming back. So that's the things that are present that he's writing about based on Revelation 1:19. And so it spends most of the book talking about that. Obviously, it's a big chunk of it, because after this, we just have 3 more chapters. And before this, we'd only hit 5 chapters. So it is a big chunk of the book. And so it's important to remember that. And that would be your best defense of how to explain that to somebody else, is to show them how, again, if the tribulation is coming to an end here in one part, but then these other things are not the same thing as the things that were happening before the tribulation ended in this part, then there's got to be multiple tribulations, or there has to be, again, what you're going to have to do is like what so many people do is you're going to have to start spiritualizing a lot of it and say, well, what this is really saying is, whatever. And it becomes a big old mess. And again, the biggest thing is you just can't make sense of the book. And so, you'll do like a Catholic, and a Catholic takes this whole book as a picture and not as anything literal. And so it jacks it all up. So there's obviously a lot of things that, because it's such a big section of scripture that we haven't necessarily talked about, but maybe we can really quickly, Big Kai, as we close this down, maybe we can kind of talk to them about a few of these things, because what you're going to find, you see those 4 accounts in all these chapters, but there's 4 chapters that talk about some random stuff that kind of give you extra insight, like kind of in sort of like behind the scenes of like stuff that's going on in the tribulation. Chapter 7 does that. Chapter 10 does that. Chapter 12 does that. Chapter 13 does that. Just kind of quickly, we can broad brush some of it, but like chapter 13 talks about the satanic trinity. Okay. And you can go study that for yourself. We don't really have time to dive. That'd be a whole episode in and of itself. But then chapter 7, like I mentioned earlier, is talking about the 144,000. Now, who is that? Well, the 144,000 is the 12,000 Jews from each Jewish tribe that are saved and that God protects, and they endure to the end. And like Kyle said, they are raptured to heaven at the end of the tribulation before the second advent. And so you see it talking about the 144,000 in Revelation chapter 7. And then you see that 144,000 in heaven in Revelation chapter 14. So you keep that in mind. Now, one thing that's worth noting is, like Jehovah's Witnesses, they are big on the 144,000, but I guess they've expanded their numbers because eventually you surpass that. They figured out. But they think that they're part of that 144,000. They think they're part of that. Yet this is obviously clearly talking about people that are Revelation 7 lays it out as clearly as you can. When it talks about different, it says 12,000 from each tribe. It literally lays out the tribes there. Like in verse 5 down through verse 8, I think. It literally lays out those tribes. So, I guess if they're from one of those tribes, those Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe they can feel a little better. And I guess they're also content with going through the tribulation. So they just don't have a clue what they're talking about.
It's a bold move to think you're one of the 144,000
yes.
when there's billions of people here.
That is crazy. Okay, and then Kyle, why don't you go ahead and let them know another thing that cool to talk about would be let them know who the great whore is in Revelation 17.
The Roman Catholic Church.
My. The Roman Catholic Church.
We could do an episode on just that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and you also have, after Revelation 17, you have that great whore, which is Babylon, which again, it starts way back at the Tower of Babel. And in Genesis, what is that? I just went blank. And anyway, in the book of Genesis starts with the Tower of Babel, but then it eventually, becomes this religious state in the book of Revelation, and that religious state falls in chapter 18. So it's the destruction of that great whore in chapter 18. Genesis 10? Yeah,
Genesis 10:10, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel.
Okay,
the first kingdom is the kingdom in Revelation 17.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so you see that it falls there in Revelation 18. So those are some interesting things to note. And then one other thing that I would note. Oh, hang on. Oh, where'd you come from, bud? You're going to keep messing this episode up, okay? One thing to note is, Kyle, go to Revelation 6:6. I thought this was interesting, and I was kind of talking to you about this the other day. This is bonus feature stuff.
Yeah. You may read it?
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine.
Okay. So I made the comment to Big Kai a few weeks ago. me and Kyle used to be invested, or Kyle still is, but I was
It's not
invested
good.
with this electrical car company, and it's not Tesla, because if we were invested in that, it would not be a sorrowful thing.
Maybe we need to say the name to draw attention to it so I can get out of debt.
That's right. That's right. Big Kai still heavily invested in Mullen, okay, a fraudulent electric car company. When I say invested, we're talking about the stock market, okay? But, people are talking about how electric cars and that kind of stuff is going to take over, the world. And I think like America has even said, or like California said, by I don't remember the exact year, 2027 or something, in a few years, everything's going to be electric. Well, I'm not buying that. Maybe California will be, but I'm not buying that most of the world will be there, because in Revelation 6, which is talking about the tribulation, notice who is going to be protected. It's going to be people that, he said, literally the last phrase says, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So the people that are in the oil business and the people that are in the wine business, they're going to always make money, and they're going to be relevant in the tribulation. So why bring that up? Well, because if I was a lost man, I'd get invested in those two businesses.
Yeah.
But because I think you shouldn't drink, as we said in episodes prior, I can't do that. But I just say that to say that, that's an interesting little nugget. That what that shows us is, because there's a one world government, and money is what rules the world now. It's showing us that money's going to rule the world then. Money always rules the world in the carnal world, the worldly side of things. And so I thought that was interesting, because all this talk of electricity and, electric cars and all this stuff. And I'm not saying Tesla's not going to do good. I think they're already doing good. Invest in them if you're a listener out there and you have the money to do so.
Please.
But gas ain't going nowhere.
Yeah.
It's here to stay. So,
yeah. I believe that verse is also talking about, buying things and stuff in the tribulation. Like, if you don't have the mark of the beast, I don't think you'll be able to afford anything.
Right. No, absolutely.
You'll be able to do anything.
Yep. Absolutely. So,
all right. I guess that's the end of this one. So if you missed the first two, go check them out. This is the third episode in this series. So we've hit the things which were, right, those first three chapters of the church age, the things which are, which is chapters 4 and 5 are going on in heaven, while 6 through 19 are going on down here on earth. If you're lost, you will be in that 6 through 19.
Yes. And let me close off from my section and just saying this, Big Guy, that Matthew 24:21 says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." So it's a time frame that's nothing's ever been like it. It's going to be that crazy.
Yep. So. Yeah. And that we read about the third woe. We read that it was in the beginning of one of those verses we read. Well, right around those woes, or when it talks about there was a moment of silence in heaven. And I know everybody makes a joke about there'll be no women in heaven, but
that's right. I'll be 33-year-old males.
Yeah, that's right. There was a moment. I believe there was a moment of silence, because things were getting, like he just read, real bad down here on earth, and everybody up in heaven was like, "Ooh."
Yep, absolutely.
But
and all that bad stuff is God's wrath being poured out. So
pouring out His wrath.
Yeah.
So if you're not sure of salvation, please message us, email us, leave a comment. We'd love to show you how you don't have to be here for chapter 6 through 19. Stay tuned. We got one more part of this. There'll be 4 parts total. We got to hit the things which shall be hereafter. So that'll be chapters 20 through 22. So stay tuned. We'll see you all on the next one.